As the mists parted from our astral forms, stepped through the other side of the portal, Genevieve and I held behind the grim and acrobat spectacle that was in the underworld. The portrait of the mausoleum didn't do justice. It was abysmal, cavernous realms stretching far overhead, as far as I could see, the horizon arching upwards like a reflection of a funhouse mirror or a 360-degree paranormal shot. All the speculums and the cave formations were monstrous in both form, size, and shape, twisted, grotesque, appealing the configurations that would be impossible under the earthly physics that were non-infidelical. The purely Lovecraftian sense of the world. The dark limestone glittered faintly under the pale, eerie light blue bathed in the entire hellscape, imitating from the ghostly aurora that danced high above us. A damp, gloomy fog crept around the ground and wished thin, spidery clouds that lazily drifted over the heads of a spiraling vortex, continuously casting mutating shadows. Numerous craggy and yawning chasms glowed with a faint blue flame as well, looking like they would swallow up anyone or anything that might dare to get too close. But the horrors of the landscape itself was nothing compared to that of Shades, the souls condemned to call the place for home for all eternity, and the ones that listlessly shambled upon the ground were still highly human, but in all some state in degradation. Some looked recently deceased. Most were skeletal wraiths of their former selves, and they were just vaguely humanoid silhouettes that no longer bore a lingering semblance for a Pacific person. Worst of all, there were all the wisps. They couldn't even be really posed as distinct from at all anymore. Just amorphous orbs of blue light hanging from the dark ether. So the ancient were just as if they lost all the memories of being human. They were so desperate to experience any trace of it once they were able to steal a biographical memories and knowledge from the living world any chance they got. But all the shades, no matter what their shapes, groaned and wailed and screamed, the voices forming a melancholy canophony upon the cold and howling wind. My knees gave out beneath me, and I would have fallen had Genevieve had not been there to catch me. This is hell, I wept slowly, and all the concept was hard for me to accept, but wanting so desperately to not be true. This is where people are left to die and rot, bitterly reminiscing the lives that they once had, over and over again, all those memories beyond recognition, until they lose any sense of what they once were, and decay identified wisps of themselves, stripped from their identity, to merely exist without any sense of self until the end of time. That's what will happen to my friend if I don't get him out. Genevieve held me in her arms, staring out of the Canophotic kingdom with a look of delusion in her eyes. "This can't be the maiden god's realm," she murmured. "These souls are suffering. The goddess is compassionate. She wouldn't allow this. Even if maiden and mother were just different avatars of the same goddess, Paraspawn is not their mother. The ancestors' journal had made that very clear," I muttered, forcing myself to my feet and reminding myself on why I had to come to the rich of places. "The wisps aren't attacking, at least. The journal said they had steal identities from terrestrial projections. But it's nice to know for sure. You know, almost the last thing my friend said to me was so long as I remembered. The wisps wouldn't be able to help steal his identity, even with the souls actually down there. Just the living people to keep you in mind enough through from fading away." We all stood in silence for a moment, taking the ghastly scene before us and trying to be overwhelmed until existential dread. "So the plan is to petition Paraspawn for pardon?" Genevieve asked at last. I thought about it for a moment, briefly considering the possibility of searching for my friend, just taking him back ourselves. I was pretty sure it didn't work like that, and even if it did, the vast horde of the dead before us assured me that the task was impossible that way. The dead outnumber the living after all. It is, I finally replied. Okay, so any idea of having to go about finding her? She asked. The plan is for her, or rather her minions, to find us, I replied. The journal said that trespassers in the underworld don't go unnoticed for very long, so let's just press forward for now and see what happens. Still hand in hand, Genevieve and I began to trek through the land of our dead, and the shades didn't pay us much mind at all, mostly sparing us sideways glance before returning to their lethargic shuffling and woeful reminiscence. I wondered if any of them were people I might have heard of. I wondered what they could have possibly have done in life to deserve such a miserable fate, and what, if anything, I could do to avoid it myself. Samantha, look, Genevieve whispered, pointing towards the ground. They were luminescent flowers and dazzling crystals poking through the cracks, droplets of almond mist crowning around them in a soft halo. Letting go of my hand, she kneeled down to the ground and scooped one up. It's warm, she said. She was amazed and a smile spreading across her face, warm and bright like nothing else here. I think we're the asphodel meadows, and these flowers are Perispone's work. They have to be. A glimmer of Summerland in the underworld is just like her. A ear-splitting screech pierced the sky above. We immediately spun our heads around, and its source, three dark winged forms, descended upon us, boxing in. Even in the glooming underworld, there were dark woman-shaped voids, speckled in the dark, hair and tail and wings of smoke, with talons in place of fingers and toes, and the faint stardust glowing dully in their hollow sockets of their eyes. They were Ares, the Furies, the daughters of primeval night. I had been expecting them. Genevieve dropped the flower, and we began to clung to each other like frightened children. The free, infernal goddesses, all cackling at our countenance. Welcome, ladies, to our realm of invisible. It's always been a delight to receive astral travelers, especially blessed ones like yourselves, the first one said. She stepped forward towards us, glaring down at us with a ravenous gaze. She lifted us a tress of Genevieve's hair in her talons, taking in a deep, confused sniff. We don't get souls like yours down here often. You've come here on a quest of some kind, I take? She tilted Genevieve's head upwards with her sharp talon, only for a bat to say. The Furies had cackled again, made no move to discipline us. Yes, we have, I spoke up, trying my hardest to seem imitated. A friend of mine was taken here because we have to deal with an ancestor of his made by Perspone, and is not fault of his own. He doesn't deserve to be here, and I would like to plead with Perspone for an appeal, please. The Fury chuckled softly, and at the moment I was terrified of what she was going to say to tell me to piss off. No need to be so formal, my dear. All trespassers get an audience with our lord and lady, whenever they want it or not, she said. Without warning, she grabbed both of us by the shoulder, her talons digging deep into our astral forms. We screamed in the first pain and terror as she took flight, lifting us into the river and across the realm of the dead. We flew all 7 of the underworld's misty rivers, each of them choked with wilding shades that only parted for the Charon with his fiery physically pushed them aside. As we flew deeper and deeper into the underworld, the ablant form of Forlorn, weeping and gnashing of teeth, was gradually replaced by something I can only describe as a clamor or ruckus. I craned my neck towards and beheld the Perspone, the city of Dis, capital of Hades. From so high above, it was so easy for the sky to laid out as a Metatron pattern of 13 circles, in one centered by 2 layers of stick candles each. The structures within the city were ghostly excavated, culture with the Gothic agriculture. It was just as if speculums, and they were all impossibly twisted, constructive that never had been allowed to stand under earthly laws. There were still some shades amongst the city's citizens, and they appeared to be more lucid and willful than the ones outside of the city walls. The majority of inhabitants were just elder kin, that had been described to me as an ancestor's journal. Some were shaped like women, like furries that have been somewhat like men, canophonic judges that were almost shaped like living at all. No mortal creature could survive with bodies like the ones I saw, and I had no doubt that these things that had been living, but they were all natives to this industrial place. Gods or fey, angels or demons, the names hardly matter. Their bodies were all spikes and horns and strange fringes, elonged and stunted limbs, scales of slime, every deformity and mutation, unimaginable, and most of all, just plain wrong. Their infernal movements, puckish chattering, left to no doubt in mind that these creatures were the shadows that have seen voices in head on Halloween, and that these were the monsters who had been so fearfully celebrating the yearly return of their queen. The palace of Hades was jet black, obesity and monstrosity perched among the enormous rock that floated on the overhead of the dead city, held in a place in several colossal change, an avalanche of fog perpetually rolling off its edges. The furies flew us directly to the throne, and then cast us carelessly upon the gleaming floor. Cold Hades, dead, dread Persephone, pardon the intrusion, but we found a pair of astral travelers who would like an audience with you, the lead fury announced. Then seated a pair of obnoxious black thrones, hovering obsidian dials, were Hades and Persephone. They both mostly had hair and profit, fair-skinned, dark-robed, white-haired, and eyes burning with the same glow that saturated the entire underworld. Hades then leaned a build with no beard, his features crisp but stern, his expression stoic, and he wore a multi-toned black crown upon his head, studded with some crystal flowers that he had found up medicinal meadows, and his abinant stood erect, and within reach he could have surely need of it. Persephone herself was stunningly beautiful, luminously resplendent amongst the gloom of her underworld, her slender form doing nothing to diminish the gravitas of her presence, her long, pale blonde hair gleaming with white as gold, with crowned coronet of the coven of crystal flowers, her aurora brighter and warmer and more energetic than anything else in the entire world, marked with a forewarner of her own kingdom. But I suddenly understood why her subjects loved her so much, why Hades loved her so much, and why she was the world brighter than being here. In the Summerland there was no darker for her absence. Her smile was the brightest light they have ever seen. Her laughter and the greatest music, her mere existence, a reminder that the better reality existed somewhere that was possible to even return to even have fallen to hell. This effect had seemed to be growing stronger upon Genevieve, who immediately began to grovel and weep. Hail, hail, fair maiden goddess, goddess of the spring and dawn of waxing moon, ever so young avatar of the great triple goddess, goddess of new life and the queen of underworld. She sobbed in a faint whisper. Most blessed though, most hallowed art you though, most I humbled and grateful to be in your presence, fairest Persephone. The goddess and archer an eyebrow in a slight amusement, but otherwise seemed unmoved by Genevieve's display of pity. It's dread, Persephone, she corrected her, sounding slightly annoyed. And my husband's here too, you know. To disrespect him is to disrespect me. Genevieve shook her head in terror, having to displease her goddess, and appeared incapable of responding. As for her, I stood up to bow to Hades. Hades, potent lord of underworld, and Zeus of Cana, king of the realm of invisible. Thank you for granting us this audience. I said, my name is Samantha. Persephone smiled. Her eyes lit up in recognition as she shifted upon her right throne. You know me? I stammered, completely dumbfounded that the queen of underworld knew who I was. Of course, you're the dabbler who's taken up residence in the Hallowed cemetery, she said. I do keep track of the astral nexus I created, and I was fully expecting that one to fade out after I claimed that last of the bloodline. What a delightful surprise it was when you found it and claimed it as your own. Congratulations for making it down here, by the way. It's been nearly 5 years since anyone's made an Arpin trek, and if I wasn't even there, the deathless merchant of the London came close to retrieve a business associate of his. Can you believe that? He then journeyed to Hades, not for love or glory or divine secrets, but to fulfill a contractual obligation. Truly bizarre. Oh, but I won't even waste your time with the anecdotes. I have other businesses to attend to, and I certainly do not want to be down here any longer than absolute necessary. You have made it this far to say what you have come here to say. I nodded and swallowed nervously, and stepped in as closer as death as I dared. This past Hallows Eve, the unnamed cemetery of Harwick Woods, a man offered himself to be your wisps as a sacrifice, and his soul now resides here, I began. He only did this because you, or the other working at your behest, had tormented him and his family, and therefore I assert his sacrifice concealed, and cannot be done freely, and that you have no right to claim upon him. It was his ancestor, not you, and not him who had promised to keep his soul to you, and what was theirs barter with. He was my friend, and it pains me to know that he is here to suffer for all eternity. For both his sake and mine, I ask for your pity, and do not release him from this realm. I stopped because of all what had said. Rules lowering that the Queen of Underworld may not have been the last tactic, but I really didn't know what else to do. Perisbone herself didn't appear to be particularly moved either. You still don't even know his name, do you? She asked, in a tone of deliration in her voice. He was not your blood or your lover, merely vagrant to what happened in your affinity of cemeteries from who you knew less than a month? That hardly seems like a loss of worth unpending the natural order of life and death of Riflecy. Yes, he was the only friend, but he was not the title I give out lightly, I replied. But I'm not asking you to do it for me, but I'm asking that he be released for no other reason than his damnation is here just unjust. Samantha, when your friend's ancestor made the bargain with me, they came to one of my subjects, a citizen of Underworld, Perisbone explained. Surely you're not arguing like it's injustice that sinistering is hereditary. By that logic, your own citizenship here in earthly nation is just an unjust. Your friend and his entire bloodline were my subjects, and I had every right to demand that they may return upon their deaths, and to punish their disobedience. The truth is that none of you guys consent to your own creation, and for good or all will forever be bounded by the actions for those came before us. Your friend is no exception. I have every right to have his soul, and will not be releasing him. Angry tears began to well in my eyes. I impotently clenched my fists as I tried to restrain myself from screaming. He didn't do anything, I persist. His wife, his child, who you didn't have to do anything? How could I accept any ruling you make just when you condemn an innocent child to hell for all this eternity? It was then Hades then stirred off on his throne, his indifference shifting into indignation at my display of indolence. His hand poisoned to grab his beating blink of an eye. The rest of the court adopted the Lord's demeanor, and stood nearby to strike me down as they would, and I would take one more step out of the line. Even Cerberus was growling at me, and I did not want to find out what it'd be like to be ripped apart by those 3 sets of jaws. Perisbone, though, grabbed her husband's hand, held it up in the palm of free hand to tell the court to stand down. She gave me a weary nod, a nod of God who accustomed to accusations that were not all be violent. Samantha, I realize that this may offend your modern egalitarian sensibilities, but obtaining the entry into the Mother Nature's Summerland or the Skyfather's Empire requires meeting a certain moral, spiritual criteria, which not everyone does, she claimed. And these are abruminous standards that upon their either astral bodies are governed by karma, just as physical bodies are by gravity. Unworthy souls are not capable of ascending or remaining in the higher regions of astral place, were not for the underworld, and they may remain in earthbound apologists. Not only such a vast number of restless spirits on earth because untold havoc, but because of their collective presence, weakened by the veil enough that the physical constants of your earth world noticeably less content, rendering all the science and technology based on upon them useless. Earth would be a demon-haunted world, both literally and figuratively. And it's not only thanks to the underworld that my husband and I maintain that is not. Worse yet, some of those souls that would be risking of falling is even lower than Earth, into Tartarus or the darkness below, which I assure you is far worse than fate than anything exists in this realm. This is not a prison, it is a poorhouse. We take it spiritually destitute, but we are not the cause of their destination. For both of their sake of earth, we maintain the industrial realm is to where those unworthy paradise that may seek shelter, but it is not us that made it unworthy of it. As any poorhouse, like not everyone here is happy, but it does make some people use better for our charity and others. And make no mistake, it is charity, not necessary, often thankless service that we provided, one that we would not be doing if we just. And that, young dabbler, is why you can trust my ruling is fair. I calmed down a little bit, as she was naturally persuasive, as the court of the damned back and beck and call. I got the impression that she might still believe what she was saying, but I wasn't willing to give up. But surely a person's karma isn't fixed upon their death. Can the shades of the underworld still become worthy assistant better of an afterlife? Is there anything I can do to help my friend? I pleaded. Please. A cold, calculating glare overtook Perispone's face, and the moment I knew she was not thinking about whatever or not was possible, but whatever or not would not tell me. As it stands, your friend is not worthy to ascend into Summerfield, and I see no reason to let him roam free on the earth, she said. Go back to your body, dabbler, study your craft, and perhaps one day maybe you'll be able to get me to change my mind. No, Perispone, please don't send me back empty-handed. I can't all have this for nothing. I'm not going back without him, I screamed. Enough, she briskly said, giving a hand-slight of commanding gesture to her husband. Hades rose from his throne, bandage in hand, his eyes turning brighter as the rest of him turned darker like a storm cloud. I froze in horror as he lunged towards me, his bright and poisoned to strike. I have no idea what would have happened if it hit me, because in that instant, Genevieve sprung back to life, throwing her arms around me, commanding both of us to wake up. Our eyes shot open and we were back in our bodies in the cemetery, gasping for breath, and hearts started to pounding from our chest. Despite the adrenaline rush, the horrors of what I had just seen, and the consequences of my unsuccessful deal with Perispone immediately overwhelmed me. I fell to the ground, curled up into a ball, and just started sobbing. Samantha! Samantha! Genevieve cried, rushing to my side and lovingly cradling me in her arms. Samantha, are you okay? No, I squeaked, with a pathetic shake of my head. I failed.